Hey, welcome back. Today I want to talk about how to read more books. I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with. We always talk about read more books, get more knowledge, but how do you actually do that and what kind of steps do you need to take? So here are my top tips. Step 1, set quantifiable goals. It is very important in order to see whether you actually accomplish what you're wanting to do, to have actual goals that are realistic, but also that are measurable, so quantifiable. Basically, set yourself a reading target. How many books do you want to read this year? Should it be 5? Do you want to read 10? Do you want to read 30? Or maybe even 50? All of that is fine, but just set yourself a goal and also don't be too stuck on that specific number, because in the end that's not really that important. Step number 2, create a reading list. It's very important to have a list of all the stuff you want to read. Maybe not the entire list, but at least parts of it. Because once you finish a book and you have to actually go out and look for another book to read, that can basically be the detriment of your motivation. So what I do, I just always have a list ready to know exactly what is the next book I'm going to read. What also helps me, I have a list with different books in different genres for different moods, because sometimes, after reading the same book in the same genre, you really feel like reading something else, and that really helps me. And it takes away the decision that you have to make with, what's the next book that I'm going to read. Sometimes it's really hard to find time in your day to devote that to reading, because we always have so many things going on. What really helped me is setting a specific routine that I'm always doing at a specific amount of times. For example, every evening, instead of watching the latest Netflix episode, at half an hour before bed, I just lie down and I'm reading in my book. That really helps me to fall asleep better, because I'm not staring at screens so shortly before bedtime, and also it really gets me into the habit. And what is also important is it should be something that you do regularly. You don't have to read a lot at once, but if you read every day, you're just going to get into this rhythm of reading. And I know if the book is really great that evening, you can read a bit longer, and if it's not, then it's fine. You can still read your determined amount of pages per day, and you still had some progress. Use that time. A lot of things in our day need to be done. For example, we always need to do some cleaning, we need to do some cooking, and what I like to do is, instead of just doing these tasks just by themselves, I always like to combine them, for example, with reading. And what I mean by that is, of course, you're not going to stand there and cooking while reading your book. That's probably not going to happen. But what you can do is listen to an audiobook, for example. So, for example, if I have to do the dishes, I like to just listen to something, and I can resume where I've left off the last time. For example, when I'm driving to work on my bike, I like to listen to a book while I'm commuting, because it saves time, because the time I would have spent doing something anyways, and might as well get double benefit out of it by listening to a book that I'm really interested in. And it also makes those tasks a bit easier, I find. Tip 5, don't discriminate. I personally think reading is whatever you do when you absorb knowledge from someone. That could be by reading physical books, that could be ebooks, that could also be audiobooks. I think a lot of people really focus on the fact that, you need to read books in order to read them, and I don't really agree with that. I think you can get a lot of knowledge from books by just listening to them. It's not an inferior way of getting the information. Of course, you could say maybe reading the words could help you with your vocabulary more, but I still think there's a place for audiobooks in your routine. I think what you do have to do, though, is you have to figure out which books are books that are good for being listened to and which books you prefer to actually read, because I think that makes maybe a bit of a difference, because while reading you will maybe, depending on your learn type, get a bit more information out. Step 6, track your reading. If you're anything like me, it's probably really difficult for you to actually remember how many different books you read over the year. I definitely used to be that kind of person where I would read, and I tend to read a lot of books at once. So I'm not the book after book after book reader, I'm more the I'm just gonna read whatever I feel like kind of reader. So I tend to read multiple books at the same time. So in order for you to actually know whether you reached your goal, you should really strive to track your reading. I personally do that with an app called Goodreads. It's only one of the few apps that are available for book tracking, and I highly recommend it. Basically, you can find almost all books with the titles. You put them on your shelves, and then you basically have your list, and then you can update the list with your progress of the book. And I think that's highly beneficial. And you can also set yourself like a reading target, and that is very helpful in actually knowing how much you read and to be able to actually adjust your goals, and also to know, did you actually achieve your goal or not. Tip 7, keep some notes. I know it's not necessary for every book that you read. Some people really pour their life's knowledge into their books that they're writing. So a lot of the books are really dense in information, and then that is something you can definitely use. So for the most important insights that I gain while reading books, I like to keep some notes. You can do that in a notes app, you can do that just by hand. You can also use other apps, for example, like Notion. You can go back and revisit your note, and you can remember, oh right, this is the book that I used to read and these are the core messages. What is also a really good tip is, sometimes you have summaries that people wrote about books that are very popular online, and sometimes I also just look at those summaries and remind myself of the books that I've read and the biggest lessons that they've taught. Tip number 8. That might sound a bit counterintuitive now because the title is called Read More Books, but honestly I really believe that quality is more important than quantity of books. In my opinion, it is far more valuable to read 3 books that have really had a meaningful impact in your life, that really meant something to you, that helped you grow, or that invoked some sort of discussion for yourself, than to read 20 books that really didn't benefit you that much. There's no fast rule to say, oh, you have to read these kinds of books and only these books are valuable. Sometimes we get the most insight in the seemingly the last place where you would ever expect it. And I think that's very beneficial, and I think it's very helpful to keep that in mind. In doubt, strive for meaning and strive for impact than for the sheer quantity. Because in the end, if you read one really good book that has a lasting impact and that helps you grow and that helps you to better yourself, I think that's better than reading hundreds of books that leave no lasting impact. And you just read them and they're all the same and you don't even enjoy them. Tip number 9, have some goals, but also be flexible in your goals. In the sense, it's always a good idea. I do that every 3 months, so once a quarter. You look at your reading goals, you look at your list, you look at your progress, and then you adjust. For example, in the first 3 months, maybe I've set a goal of reading 20 books, but reality is I've only read 3. So is it very likely that I'm going to finish my reading goal? Probably not. And that's fine, because in the end, it's very hard sometimes to gauge how much time we actually have to read more books. It's far better to just keep note over 3 months, track it, evaluate it, compare it towards your goal, and then to adjust your goal if necessary. That doesn't mean that you have to give up on your goal, because sometimes it's even better to have higher goals than are actually achievable, but still be realistic. Don't beat yourself up about it, because in the end, like I said, it's not a competition. And number 10, maybe the most important tip, just enjoy the process of reading. It's not a competition, it's not about reading the most books, it's not about showing off how much you're reading. In the end, it's really about what you're gaining out of it and what messages are you learning, what new insights are you getting. And this is really the main reason why people should read in the first place, because it really opens you up to new experiences, to new information, to new knowledge, and I think that's great. But all of that is not as valuable in the end if you don't really enjoy what you're doing. So don't force yourself to read only books that you deem beneficial or a classic or a must-read. Also, just read books that you generally enjoy. And it doesn't matter if it's a guilty pleasure read. If you enjoy it, that's the most important thing. And it will probably also motivate you to read further and read more in the future. So guys, I hope you enjoyed these 10 tips to how to read more books this year. If you have any more tips or any comments you want to leave them down below. I'm always interested in you guys' opinion, and I hope to see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.
Like, bye.